Our slide remotely. And in the way of a very quick introduction, my name is Paul Olenek, as I mentioned. I am one of AvePoint's directors of product strategy, have a long history in Office 365 and SharePoint and related technologies before that, and happy to be talking to you about this topic. We are very lucky today in that we have one of the few people on the planet that have actually spent some real have some real world experience with Project Cortex today. And in fact, if you looked at a lot of the video content that Microsoft has published about Project Cortex, my esteemed co-presenter is featured in much of that. And so I'll pass it over to Simon to introduce himself.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm Simon Denton. I'm the architect responsible for all things Office 365 and Microsoft 365, a global engineering consultancy called Mott MacDonald. I describe myself as a sort of enabler, designer, cajoler in my spare time, and I'm Microsoft MVP. And yes, I've been very privileged to have very, very early insights into Project Cortex, really seeing it from the early days of the bits of JSON all the way up to the pretty UI that you may have seen in the videos up to today. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm glad you're here. And I didn't even know that cajoler was a career path, so I'm excited to. I'm learning things already. We want to, sorry, I just have a tiny bit of a delay advancing the slides. Let's try that. Simon, maybe you can, oh no, I got it now. So we do want to thank AvePoint, both for employing me all these years, but more importantly for sponsoring this webinar today. And for those of you not familiar with AvePoint, we are a global ISV with about 2 decades of experience providing solutions to Microsoft customers, mostly in the categories of migration, management, and protection. And we're going to talk more about what AvePoint can do to help you in knowledge management and knowledge sharing towards the end of this webinar. But let's jump into the content here. So, I think we want to spend the majority of this presentation and webinar really digging into Project Cortex. I think that's sort of the start of the show, but it is worth it to just sort of ground us in what are some of the common challenges that we're trying to solve and that Microsoft is trying to solve with a lot of the latest investments that they're making, especially in Project Cortex, in the new Yammer and so forth. So one is that there's a lot of content. We're generating it at an unprecedented rate. And the information is found everywhere, right? Across different systems, on premises, physical documents, all sorts of things. And it's almost like you need to know, one, that the content already exists, that you know that it exists, and where it lives before you can even find it, which is not a recipe for knowledge discovery and knowledge sharing, right? And then there's this idea that the expertise of individuals, that we tend to lose that, or we tend not to take advantage of it, especially when somebody exits the company, right? Even if I've got all my content and it survives my exit of a company and it's living in my OneDrive, well, who's going and looking at it? Who's mining it for information that we can use in subsequent projects and so forth? And I think we could have an entire webinar just about these concepts, but we want to focus specifically on some of the innovations that Microsoft has introduced or will be imminently that really promise to help organizations with these types of issues. And we're going to start on the knowledge sharing side. And by that, I want to talk a little bit about the new Yammer, right? So if we kind of think about knowledge management that Simon's going to talk more about with Project Cortex, we can talk about knowledge sharing on the Yammer side. So let's jump into some of the innovations that we're finding there. So I think we have to be honest with ourselves that a lot of our customers, Microsoft customers, really weren't sure what was happening with Yammer, right? It was acquired quite some time ago, and there's sort of been, I don't know, mixed messages, so to speak, about what's happening. And many customers, I think, were playing a sort of wait and see game about where things were going to go. And it is now very clear that Microsoft is investing heavily in the service. And I think more importantly, they've defined what Yammer's place is in the world of Office 365. And that is specifically, if you see the 3 bold black words at the top of this slide here that I borrowed from Microsoft, it's about communities, knowledge, and engagement. And in fact, one of the big ways that Microsoft has signaled this is to change the name of what we used to call Yammer groups to Yammer communities. That may seem like a subtle shift, but I think it actually really helps customers understand sort of when to use what, right? That's this common idea that people asked and sort of screamed about when, especially when Teams was first introduced, and you saw a lot of overlap between what Yammer can do and what Teams can do and what certain aspects of SharePoint can use. So on the screen, I'm showing this inner loop, outer loop image. And this is a pretty old idea, an old message that Microsoft's been talking about since the introduction of Teams. But I think what we've seen is that as customers, as a community of customers, we've sort of matured and we're really starting to understand that. And even at AvePoint, where we really live and breathe, Office 365 and Teams and so forth, some of our teams went through a somewhat painful journey where we were using sort of Yammer for everything about broadcasting and collaborating. Then we went whole hog Teams, somewhat to the exclusion of Yammer, and now have reverted back to using each for their intended purpose, for what they're best at. And so we use Microsoft Teams for regular and repeated interaction amongst a closed loop of people. And then we'll use our Yammer communities for, talking to the field, where we communicate with people that maybe we didn't even know existed, right? And we're a global company, and we don't know everybody personally. And we can shout from the edge of a cliff and we'll get answers and insights that resonate back to us from other teams, other regions, other countries, and things like that. And so we've really felt this personally about how this evolution has taken place. And one thing I'll just kind of call out to, since we don't have time to get too deep into this particular topic, is if you want to hear more about our journey in particular, you can check out a blog by our CTO of Public Sector and Microsoft Regional Director, John Peluso, where he goes into a lot of detail about our journey using Teams and Yammer. Secondly, we need to talk about something called native mode, right? This is a big investment that Microsoft has made in Yammer as well. And so one of the benefits, you would say, of consolidating onto a platform like Office 365, as opposed to using separate vendors for all these different services that you find baked into Office 365, is that horizontal capabilities, things like access control, security, e-discovery, and legal hold, things like that, can be applied in a sort of monolithic manner, right, across all the different services, using, hopefully a single pane of glass. But until recently, Yammer sort of stuck out on the side, and it was an outlier in this regard, right? There were different controls, or in some cases lacking controls, to do some of these things. So through some changes both in architecture, specifically moving the Yammer architecture onto the Office 365 substrate, and a little bit in philosophy, Microsoft has come up with a new mode to run Yammer in, which is called native mode. And it's really a game changer for many organizations, because it allows you to fold Yammer into your existing Office 365 governance strategy, right? In terms of lifecycle, in terms of provisioning workspaces and so forth. So some of the things, and this is an abridged list that you will get if you run Yammer in native mode, is you'll be able to execute e-discovery through the Office 365 Security and Compliance Center, both for Yammer and all of your other content and services. The other thing that takes place is that all of your Yammer groups and users will be managed through Office 365, right? So moving towards that single pane of glass instead of having it sort of as an outlier. Also, all of your Yammer groups will be Office 365 connected, which means they have access to the Office 365 features. Yammer will honor Office 365 group creation rights. So if you've got certain provisioning and self-provisioning rules and governance, you can control your provisioning across the organization, including for Yammer. And all of the files that you upload to groups will be stored in SharePoint. Well, they'll be subject to the same governance and lifecycle as the rest of your content, right? So really a game changer for those that are very interested in and concerned about their governance for Yammer and everything else. The other thing that we're seeing is that there's just really investments being made across the board, and I think that can give customers a lot of confidence that they can really take another look, if they haven't been using Yammer, take another look at it, and with the confidence that it's being invested in, and that it is a core part of Microsoft's strategy going forward. So just to call out a few things, there's a new UX, right? So both on the web and in mobile, And it includes things like the Office 365 people card that we're seeing across the entire service in Office 365. Excuse me. A huge focus on optimizing for use cases involving community managers and corporate communications, giving them things like pinned posts, the ability to close conversations and filter conversations and things like that, as well as the ability for leadership to provide video content, event Q&A and question filters, different things like that. And in general, we're finding that the content is going to be and has become more engaging, right? We've given our publishers a modern sort of experience for publishing content and creating content. And we've got new treatments for different types of posts like questions, polls, and praise, and lots of vibrant photos and things like that in the feed. So just a better user experience all around. And then I think another thing that you can point to that really shows the will inspire confidence in terms of the long-term vision for Yammer and the inclusivity. I think I just made up a word. Inclusiveness, maybe, of Yammer is the deeper integrations that Microsoft has invested in, right? So we're seeing that you're going to be able to use Yammer inside of Teams, right? Both through the use of a Yammer app in Teams, where you'll get full access to all of your different communities and so forth in Yammer directly from Teams, where if you're like myself, spend most of your day with Teams open, as well as being able to open Yammer in a tab in Teams where you can maybe pin a specific community that is related to a specific team, right? Similarly, we're getting a new full-featured web part that supports posting, commenting, and rich text. So really, pretty much the full experience of Yammer that will be baked right into SharePoint via the use of a web part. And then some interactive experiences right in Outlook where you can comment and things like that directly in Outlook if you're somebody that spends most of your day in Outlook, like, again, many of us do. So I think all of these things really conspire to give confidence in investing in Yammer. Again, giving it a second look if it's something that you've been waiting on the sidelines to see where Microsoft was going with this. I think they've made it very clear where they're going now. They've sort of named and defined its place in the world of Office 365 and clearly forecasted that this is something they're investing in and it's part of their core strategy. So on the knowledge sharing side of this topic, those are the things that I wanted to share with you and that I would encourage you to look a little bit more deeply in if you are interested in revisiting Yammer after seeing some of these innovations. So with that, I'm going to throw it over to Simon, where, again, if we're talking about knowledge sharing here and the investments there, we want to talk about the deep investments that Microsoft has made in knowledge management through something that Microsoft calls Project Cortex.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Paul. I just wanted to touch upon the fact that new Yammer really does show that Microsoft are moving to a state where knowledge and where work is getting done is doesn't really matter. It can be done in Outlook, it can be done in Yammer, SharePoint, using Cortex or Teams. The point is the guardrails are all going to be consistent and where you get it done and where you can share the knowledge and engage with communities. All those experiences are going to be consistent. In a way, I think it's going to help dilute that what to use and when sort of conversation. So yeah, I'm going to give you sort of a lightning tour of Project Cortex and really try and explain where Project Cortex fits into the challenges of knowledge sharing and knowledge management. Now, I do need to make a few quick, humble apologies. Mott MacDonald are one of the very early private preview customers. I would love to show you lots of screenshots of how we're using it and how we're doing it, but fortunately we do have some controls around that. So I will be using some of the Microsoft marketing material to help illustrate some of my points. And also through the journey, I'll touch upon how we've been working with Microsoft as well. So you might find that interest. So without further ado, really, the goal of Project Cortex is to address some of the challenges around knowledge sharing and knowledge management. Some of these challenges that Paul mentioned at the top of the hour, but some of these other ones around trust and authority, trust to share knowledge, the authority to share knowledge, the authority to consume it and work with it. what and when and how to share that information. And a lot of this is founded upon fears of misuse. I mean, within our organization, we would love to share more of our engineering designs out there, but there's always that worry that someone might take that bit of knowledge and maybe use it for the case they don't. But also there's that whole challenge around classification of knowledge. Some organizations have taxonomies, others don't. And which taxonomy is right? I mean, even Amazon, an organization built upon taxonomy, really struggled at the beginning to work out how to classify content, how to describe the things in such a way that people can find and reuse it. And I think if we take it back to the organizational lens, the challenge with knowledge sharing and knowledge management is that we're just not sharing enough. And by not sharing enough, we're not really growing as organizations at the rate that potentially we can do. And so one of the goals of Cortex is really to address this through AI, to automatically organize your content, as well as delivering experiences. These experiences range from topic cards, pages, and areas like knowledge centers. And the idea being that these things permeate through Microsoft 365. They appear in Office, Outlook, Yammer topics, part of the Cortex knowledge network, and in services like Teams. The idea being that it brings it all together, so you can discover, reuse, and participate in knowledge, whichever platform you're in. Now, Cortex is really based around 3 key experiences, and you'll see as I go through the experiences that you'll interact with are sort of arranged around this. So it's around empowerment, empowering people with knowledge and expertise in the apps they use every day. So, for example, asking a question in Teams, where do I find this? How do I do that? And getting the answer back. Connecting and organizing, connecting your content and organizing knowledge using things like the graph. Cortex really demonstrates the power and investment within the graph about connecting people to content and content to people. And finally, the final sort of pillar, which is without sort of management and protection, especially when there's features like AI involved, organizations want to be sure about the security. They want to know that the right people have access to the knowledge, and there are workflows built around that process. So the first thing I would really want to talk about is some of the experiences within Project Cortex. And on the screen, you can see what's called the Knowledge Center. These are one of these hubs where we can start bringing together knowledge. You can see on the right-hand side that topics that have been picked up by the services, by the AI services around the different expertise that people have maybe, and the topics that they're interested in, and drawing these together within a hub. And the fact is you can start drawing projects and acronyms together through your flow of work and through search. And also there's this new knowledge center allows you to give you a degree of moderation and a degree of management. So on the screen, you can see what is called one of the topic cards. And if you've seen any of the videos, you've probably seen there's a really good walkthrough around how these topic cards work. But effectively, Cortex and the algorithms behind Cortex are processing content that you want it to process. So you have control over what it can look at and what it can't see. In this case, it's running through emails and SharePoint content and looking for key terms and key terminology that is relevant to your organization. And once it discovers those bits of content, it can highlight them and start building what these topic cards up. And so you can start seeing, well, okay, what does project call mean? I can see what the understanding is. You can see who the key people are involved in it. Now, this is the sort of the UI that you will see once a product reaches general availability. But as a sort of an early engagement customer, we've spent many months looking at the topic cards just as big blocks of JSON and then having to work through and understand it. But the benefit of them being big blocks of JSON really are, if you're a fan of using APIs with your knowledge management and with SharePoint, there's a good hint there. There's a nice range of APIs coming along with this as well, so you can start work with it nicely. But those topic cards don't just pop up in more than one place. Microsoft Search was obviously another big investment. You can start seeing suggestions for profiles. So based on the definition of a different topic, you can see it. Now, we've been working with Microsoft to influence about who can and can't see what's on this topic card. And so all the content on these cards is permissions trimmed based on the source content. There's no additional loops to jump through. So one person viewing these topic cards may just see the definition. Other people viewing the cards with access to the underlying content will be able to see the actual underlying content as well. And we've been seeing that flowing through within our test environments. Another area which I touched upon, which is where it comes towards the integration of the knowledge as well. So what happens if you want to understand what something is? Well, you can, and you're getting your work done in Teams, you can start asking questions within Teams, and Teams can then look at the taxonomy, understand the question that you're asking, and maybe draw up the appropriate knowledge page. The point is, it's integration into everyday work that allows people to create, discover, and reuse knowledge most easily. It reduces that level of friction. So the next sort of experience, or the next sort of pillar, is around the connecting and organisation of knowledge across teams and systems. And this is where we really start to see the knowledge network building up. You may have seen this. So one of Cortex's key strengths is it's underpinned by the graph, and it can mine Office 365 and connected systems. We've seen it in practice within our environments, locating topics that describe our organisation that we've spent many months trying to work out manually. Well, does this term describe Mark McDonald? Does this one? Oh, yeah, this is the one to do it. And we've seen through Cortex and through its sort of AI mining of the graph and looking at interactions of people, it can start building up a reliable list of topics that describes the organisation. And it starts to pin things together. Sorry, my pointer's got stuck there. And I just showed you this earlier, but one of those areas that it comes together from a curational point of view is in the knowledge center, but also you can deploy these centers to give people a personalized view of knowledge in their organization. It gives you this sort of, I don't know how many of you have got a formal learning management system and discovering knowledge through there. This gives you this sort of informal approach to learning, not just within your organization, but connections outside of the sources like LinkedIn. And I think that's important from knowledge management and knowledge sharing, because there's quite a high bar to developing a prescribed, say, internal training course. And to be able to start aggregating knowledge together and starting to string that together as a potential flow of expertise that you want people to follow, or a path you want people to follow, and to do that quite easy, I think that would really assist people with knowledge sharing and management. Then there's these things. Now, one of the things that Cortex can do, it can use machine teaching and learning to augment and extract meaningful metadata from unstructured sources like photographs, files, receipts, business cards, etc. And what you're seeing on the screen here is one of the early betas of the, or early versions of the machine teaching environment. This is where it will process, you could feed it samples of documents, you process documents there, and you're trying to look for key terms and words to build up your taxonomy. And that requires a fair investment of time to kind of work through those processes, but it is really, really useful in reinforcing the topics and the taxonomy that Cortex is developing. And everything that is sort of developing is being stored within your term store. And this is one of those sort of positive reinforcement areas. Another great advantage of this is if you've got loads of contracts that have a loose-ish structure, you could start pulling out key customers, key terms, keywords, and start building up an archive in that respect.
Hey, Simon, do you mind if I interrupt you for a second? We have
Sure.
a question that came through that I think is somewhat relevant to where you are at the moment in your
Sure.
presentation. So the question is, are the keywords / taxonomy automatically created from content, or can it be seeded?
Yeah, So yeah, that's a really good question. So that kind of leads me to here too, right? So yes, the initial set of terms or topics are automatically created there, but you can seed them and train them through different approaches. One is the machine teaching approach. You can teach Cortex to recognize specific types of documents and associated with particular terms. Terms are stored within the SharePoint term store. So I'll come on to in a minute the fact that you can go in and manage those terms and curate those terms based on the content in the term store. I think one thing you need to hold in your mind, Cortex Cortex uses AI to determine what it thinks, which topics it thinks are applicable. You as an organization might have topics and terms that you know are applicable. There's this curation layer where the two need to come together and you determine which topics and terms are the ones that describe your organization. And Cortex includes the facility to do that. So hopefully that answers that question. One of the other areas that Cortex processes, like unstructured information, you can start using it to process structured sources like invoices. And this is one that we've started using already. This is one of the really early components of Cortex that we could get our hands on. What it allows you to do is to use the AI Builder service to process structured information. And from structured information and Power Automate, you can start taking metadata from things like an invoice or a bridge inspection or a project summary sheet and adding that as key terms as metadata to either the content itself within SharePoint or maybe extracting them to a list, because at this point there's real flexibility. The processing that you see on your left with sort of object recognition and entity recognition and bounding boxes, all of those items are held within a prediction model, and that prediction model is available to Power Automate, which allows you to then write steps and processes around that. So if you wanted to grab all the invoice numbers off a particular object and add them to a SharePoint list with some other information, you could. And you could do that quite easily, and that's one of the things we'll be doing as well. The next sort of experience and the third pillar of experience really is, I guess, the one that that I think if you've used SharePoint for a little while, and I've been in SharePoint maybe only 6 years tops, so I maybe don't feel the pain of a seasoned SharePoint 2010 or 2013 user or administrator, is that you've probably seen that certain services within SharePoint have not been shown a lot of love. And things like the managed metadata service and content types are really, have just been sort of stuck in the past a bit. Cortex can only work really with improvements to the managed metadata service. So if you want to get to the vision of having one term or topic to rule them all across Office 365, so a topic in Yammer is exactly the same as a term in SharePoint, the way you can achieve that is through investment within the managed metadata service. And so what you can see on the screen at the moment is the new managed metadata people term pickers. So a much more user-friendly experience about picking objects and items that you've got from your AI inferred taxonomy, and then you've managed through the SharePoint term store. But also investments in a term store means it's gonna get a makeover, and this is one of the makeovers that we have in our environment. That okay, yes, to some it just looks like a pretty refresh, but there's actually a lot more going on underneath the hood. The fact is that they're increasing the number of terms and synonyms in the term store, because if you've got AI determining, or maybe these topics are important before they're curated, you could risk getting tens, hundreds, or thousands of these terms, and you could risk bumping up against limits. So they're going to bump up the limits within the term stores. They're also going to give you some new APIs in which you can interact with the term stores as well. And we've been talking about areas around term management because the term store has really is a very hierarchical setup. It's very much geolocation. Okay, that's Asia, the region. It's North America, the region, and it's states and counties and so on. But actually, taxonomies and terms are much more fluid around that. So there are investments going in looking at, can we remove the sort of hierarchy within the term store as and when we need it. But also to do that, you really need to understand where your terms have been impactful. And so there's new analytics coming to the term source, so we can see where items have been used. You can be able to see, not off this visual, but you can see off the visuals that we've been using. You can see which ones have been the sort of the Cortex terms and which ones are yours as well. So you can start seeing which ones are more effective. And from that, you can start taking actions and looking at how the knowledge is linked and created. The other area that's going to get that's already receiving a really nice refresh is content types. I don't know, how many of you just start pulling your hair out when you want to syndicate a content type, but you're not quite sure when it's gone and where it's gone to. For Cortex to be successful, content types have to work really, really well. So you can associate the right terms and right topics with the right elements of content. So to do that, they're having to invest quite heavily within the content type hub and developing a new content type gallery. So we've been seeing actually when our particular content types have actually been syndicated out. We've actually known when they're happening, and we've got a good feel when the next ones are going to go. So it's much more than just a sort of modern experience, but it's one of those key foundational layers that enables Cortex to do its work. You'll also see on to the right-hand side of the screen that you can have the ability to target where it's going to be used. Because Cortex is very selective, you can determine which site collection, which people, which mailboxes, and so on, where Cortex can apply its algorithm. So you also need to be able to target the underlying infrastructure where you'd use types and where you'd use terms and so on. So that's coming soon too. So now
Simon, you mind if I interject something?
Go, yeah.
Well, for one, we have another good question.
Sure.
And actually, this is one I'm very curious to hear your answer to as well. Is the question is, what kind of effort upfront did it require to teach/seed Cortex taxonomy in order to make topic cards most relevant?
It's a fab question. How much effort do you have to go in? So, to be honest, not a lot at all, really. So you do have to give it some representative sets of information to look at. Now, in traditional AI, you'll be looking at documents in the thousands to train and teach models, but the teaching platform within Cortex is cut down to between 5 and 10 documents of the sort of similar type, and you can teach it. So it's very quick to understand various topics. And you can actually leave it in a completely unmanaged state. We left it for about a month, just mining several sites, and then the algorithm itself was starting to look at, these are what the key terms are, these are the key people who are making the connections. And actually, in those situations, you haven't had to put a lot of effort in. I think the big value is that we've had to do this all by looking at blobs of JSON. To do this. This is not what the sort of product is when it comes out to be available to people. You're going to have a nice UI to do it. So yes, we did have to invest a little bit more time into processing, looking at JSON and understanding and looking at confidence scores. But time-wise, I think the first run we looked at about 10. Yeah, there was about 1,000 documents just to look at on a fairly similar subject matter held within a site, and actually one cursory look at the output told us that it was spotting the right terms. And I did perform a comparison of those against an auto classification service that we have as well, and actually there's a really good correlation between what the auto classification service was producing versus what Cortex was doing. So actually investment level was pretty low, to be honest, which I think is a really good plus point. I think that's something that really puts people off knowledge management and knowledge strategy when they think the bar is really high.
Right. Yeah, I think especially when you bring up things like machine learning, there's this kind of funny curve that we've seen since sort of the machine learning has entered the zeitgeist in technology, where everybody thought of it as kind of like magical fairy dust that you could sprinkle on stuff to make everything work better. And then folks that actually delved into it realized like, oh, this actually requires a lot of investment from the customer. And now here's one of the things that I think is impressive about the way that Project Cortex works is that it brings to bear for customers the benefits of that machine learning, but it really lowers the bar, and it sort of obfuscates the complexity of the training, minimizes the amount of training that you have to do yourself, or actually they would say teaching, right? Machine teaching, not machine learning. But that's maybe the thing that I think is most impressive about Project Cortex is how it really makes it sort of democratizes AI and machine teaching and machine learning in a way that folks can actually take advantage of it without having a data science degree kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely. You know, I don't have a degree in neuro-linguistic programming or anything like that, or AI, and it's been certainly very easy just to pick it up and run with it and understand the, understand what it's telling us. So really, this is, I thought I was kind of head towards give you a feel for what's coming and when, because you may have seen a few of the sort of the promotional videos or some of the roadmap material. You may have even seen the sessions at Ignite. So this is the roadmap that's rolling out as is. Now you'll see that for Cortex to succeed, there needs to be work in other places within the Microsoft stack. So there's work going on in Microsoft Search, using the connector model to extend things into new repositories. So obviously Cortex needs to be able to start reaching into other areas, and one of the areas it can achieve that is through connectors, and the term set increases, which are rolling through at the moment. We're very much in in Cortex v1. It's very much the sort of the private preview and the new public-private preview. I think that's the right terminology. And that's where we've been getting experience of using the taxonomy around the user controls, analytics, some content type creation management, starting to play with topic cards and pages, starting playing with some of the APIs which are becoming available, which we need to use to interpret the topic cards, and the content understanding process. So as I say, I've been using quite a lot of AI Builder to process things like bridge inspections and invoices. All that sort of building up to a release candidate that we are working through and testing. In fact, I think in the next sort of 6 or so weeks, we're testing the various features out for the sort of final release candidate. And there's some other bits and pieces that are going on as well. So obviously Microsoft Search is running out as well, and there's some work going on Yammer on its topics, which I haven't put on the thing, and some additional updates to queries and so. So what does the future look like? So Cortex is slated for release in the second half of 2020, and through the program, Microsoft have been really open and honest, and they've shared their hopes, fears, and aspirations with us. I just wish I could share some of them with you, rather than just sharing some of the sort of the top level things that they put in the public domain. But they really do see this as the tool that empowers organisations to unlock latent knowledge. It very much is a program that's going to be going on for way well through 2020, and there's probably way out into 2021. They need to make sure everything flows through all the Microsoft 365 products. There's some really cutting edge AI within this. This has got some really amazing AI in terms of being able to cut down the training from thousands of documents, which is very traditional AI based, to the fives and tens of documents. That takes a lot of work to do. And then there's finding mechanisms where you can transact with publicly available AI, not to share your content, but to keep that within the enterprise, but to reduce that level of input people need to do to process content. One of the great things, it will restore metadata as king within Office 365 or Microsoft 365, and it will demonstrate the power of the graph. You'll see a lot more around its ability to connect people and people to content and content to people as well. Certainly through the second half of the year, when they start looking at more the learning journeys that people have around knowledge and knowledge management, for example. I just want to kind of wrap up that Cortex is aimed at everyone. It's what I want to stress, it doesn't matter if you have a formal approach to knowledge management or not. It's not going to be the silver bullet. It's not going to fix everything, because you still have to do that curation process. You still have to look at the things it's suggesting and like the things it's suggesting, or override the things it's suggesting. But what it's going to do is give everyone a massive push in the right direction when it comes to knowledge management. And I think as products go, you couldn't have written you couldn't have created something else that was as close to your mission statement as possible, which is to empower every person and every organization, if you hadn't have created Cortex. This is really fantastically brilliant piece of engineering that's going to reduce people's workloads in terms of developing knowledge, of their strategies to knowledge, to reducing the mundane in terms of processing invoice and unstructured information, to detecting objects and things. It's going to really lower that bar, and I think it's going to really empower every organization to achieve more and get more done.
So maybe hang on this slide for a minute, and
Yeah.
and let's do some questions specifically on Project Cortex before we go to the next section. So one question, which is perfect, it was something I was going to bring up anyway, is what can folks do today to get ready for Project Cortex? And so I can share what Microsoft says, but I'd be curious to see what you would add to this, Simon, having gone through the process of sort of onboarding the technology into your tenant. So what Microsoft will talk about is, one, you want to get content into Office 365, right? So it can't benefit from all the goodness of Project Cortex unless that content is actually there. So whatever that means for you in terms of migrating content from legacy systems or mapping it from legacy systems into Office 365. And so they're creating more ways for you to map content from other systems if you're not able to do a migration, whether that's through a legacy search connector or something like that. The other thing you're going to want to do is get to modern pages, right? So if you're still running pages in classic mode for whatever reason, all of the new investments in terms of the user experiences that Simon was showing are going to, I believe, require modern pages. And you, Simon, you can.
Yeah, there's a little bit of a caveat that we've been seeing it works fine if you've got a classic site but a new modern page within it. It's quite happy with that. It's quite happy, if you've got some wiki pages or parts of your intranet are modern page based. It doesn't mean the entire site has to be modern, but there are some tools available to help you do that process too.
Got it. Yeah. So get to the modern pages, and then the other thing is knowing that it relies heavily on your taxonomy, on your managed metadata, that you're going to want to update, revamp, rethink your managed metadata and clean that up, because you're going to be investing in it more in the future and so forth. So I don't know if you have more specifics that you might share about that, Simon.
Yeah. I think there's a couple of approaches. One is, yes, you go away and do a cleanup, right? And you understand these are the terms, this is what they mean to us and what their definition is. That's certainly one approach if you've got an existing taxonomy that you're using, because at some point that taxonomy is going to get challenged by Cortex. It's going to say, well, you describe concrete as this and I describe concrete as that, and you need to do that process. So yes, you could go and do that tidying up exercise, and I think that's great. If you don't have a taxonomy, I wouldn't, just think about sitting tight for a little bit longer, right? Maybe just understand the fundamentals of what taxonomy means to you, and maybe think about where those sort of key sources of information that would come from, because there is a curation engine coming, so you'll be able to kind of process it. So yeah, my advice, if you can, do a tidy up. If not, just start asking yourself the questions about, what does this term mean to me? Why am I using this term? And have those ready for you. Maybe tap up your knowledge management practitioner if you have one in your organization, see what their strategy is for 2020 and beyond.
Yeah, so I'm going to inject, there's a few more questions here. There's one that I wanted to sort of, there's a statement, a comment, and then a question that I wanted to interject here. So one of the things that I think I struggled with, and I see customers struggling with, is like, what the heck is this thing, right? And because you'll go to Ignite or watch the videos for Ignite, which I would encourage everyone to do, there's a lot of interesting videos about Project Cortex, and I'm kind of trying to wrap my mind around like, well, what is it? Is it a feature? Is it, and the more I've gotten uh, to hear about it directly from Microsoft and to dig into it, what I realize is that these are investments that have been made across the board in Office 365, in Azure, huge coordinated effort that so far is bringing to bear a very, very specific pointed user experiences like you've shown. But I think that uh, in order to kind of understand what it is, one thing you could look to is the name. They didn't call it a feature, right? They called it Project Cortex. This is a project that Microsoft has embarked on, and it involves a myriad of different teams, again, across Azure and Office 365, that have only started to bring to bear some very specific user experiences. So what you really have to look at is what is their mission statement with the project, and then all of this sort of tangentially related work that they're doing in search, that they're doing in Lewis, right, in terms of machine learning in Azure and so forth. But I don't know if there's anything you'd want to add to that, and just in terms of helping folks get clarity about like, what is this thing?
Yeah, when people talk about Exchange and the substrate, and it's this mythical thing that that holds Yammer posts and emails.
Yeah.
Cortex is that, right?
Yeah.
View it like the substrate. It's there. It's flowing underneath everything. If you try and process it, then I think it'd be difficult. But you're right. It's a sum of parts. It's a very big sum of parts, and then new investments as well. But yes, it's something that underpins and slightly runs under everything else.
Yeah, I
it's
like
this
the way
Rubik's Cube, right? Right.
That's
no, you don't really want to. You know it works, right? You know it spins. But the innards, you're not really fussed about the innards. It's what happens on the outside that you will get all the clear faces, right?
I didn't know we were doing props. I might have something like. So the other thing question I wanted to interject is, and something that, again, when I was first learning about Cortex, that kind of was nagging at me is like, can you talk a little bit more specifically about what the actual workflow is from keywords and things getting mined to the actual curation process to it then appearing in front of your users?
Sure. So getting things mined, just select site collection, where it goes. It does some mining, and depending on the size of the site collection or the number of collections and amount of content, it processes it bewilderingly quickly. I did ask the engineers, "Oh, should I go away and come back in 24 hours?" No, just go get a cup of tea. It'll be done. Incredibly quickly, and then it comes back, and then where it manifests, you will see either in the UIs, in the knowledge center or the content center, depending on the approach to management. You will see the topics and terms within that, and you'll also see the topics and terms within the term store. And that's it. It's done its piece, right? There's not much more from there. You can then go in and then curate, say within the knowledge center or content center from there, and augment and add, promote, reject, map to existing terms in your term store. But yeah, getting it mining it's just very straightforward. Yeah.
And that curation process, is it all funneled to one person or group of people, or is it sort of something that you can
you can target individuals? This is in a way, this is a good way of empowering your subject matter experts within your organization. You can give them subsets of the taxonomy to focus on, and that's what we do at Mott MacDonald. We have sort of our taxonomies broken broadly into 60-ish areas of interest in which we practice in. Each one of those has a knowledge manager assigned to it and a subject matter expert, and we hand off those taxonomies to them, mainly because of scale. But yeah, that's one area to focus on.
Perfect. So I'm going to go through the last few remaining slides. We have a few more questions that we're going to answer here in the last few minutes of the session. So attendees, feel free to chime in with any additional questions. Simon, I just want you to be thinking while I'm going through these last few slides about, there are questions about licensing, and what I'm not sure is what is public and what is not. and so I'm hesitant to say too much, but maybe you are comfortable talking about that. So one of the things that I wanted to share, again, our esteemed sponsor, AvePoint, has a number of ways that we complement and help organizations with Office 365 in general and their journey, their digital journey and journey to the cloud. And specifically, we can talk a little bit about how we complement and extend knowledge management in Office 365. And so if you're not familiar with us, we've got, a lot of different types of solutions. These that are on the screen are specifically for Office 365 and cloud, and this is a subset of our solutions. And so we have a lot of solutions that complement customers' investments in knowledge management and Office 365. I'll just call out two specifically, migration and records management, that are highly relevant. The first topic that came up and that Microsoft always brings up, when you say, what can you do to get ready for Project Cortex, is like, well, get your content into Office 365 where it's going to be subject to Project Cortex's goodness, so to speak. And so we help customers daily, right? This is one of our flagship products. It's something we have a very long and storied pedigree in, and daily we quickly and easily get customers content to Office 365, whether it's from a legacy SharePoint version, whether it's from Slack or file shares, or just about any other system that you can really think of, so that, again, they can start taking advantage of all the goodness in Office 365 and Project Cortex and really try to consolidate their content under the roof of Office 365. As you can see from this one slide, we've got a sort of comprehensive platform that moves content from the most common systems. And we've got different versions that suit organizations with very simple needs that just want to kind of lift and shift, very powerful engines for those that have huge migrations or granular needs. And then we also have solutions that can be installed on premises for customers that have, privacy considerations, folks that need to scale up, that have very large and complex environments, and so forth. So we really have a number of solutions that can scale to meet the needs of pretty much any customer from a migration perspective. Another thing worth talking about, I don't know how to go backwards here. Is that back?
Previous.
I over-clicked.
You talk, I underclick you.
Awesome, thank you. Another thing that sticks out that we didn't talk about specifically, but that Microsoft has made investments in with regard to knowledge management, is records management, right? Again, one of the benefits of getting your content into Office 365 is that and again, some of the innovations that they made with Yammer in terms of where documents are stored and so forth, is that content will be subject to your governance policies, which is inclusive of records management. There's been a lot of investments in Office 365 labels and records management in there. And so this is another area that we have invested in as well. And for customers that, especially that have formal records management requirements, those in highly regulated industries, they might require some help from AvePoint above and beyond what you get out of the box with Office 365. And so what we provide is the ability to define a centralized classification that is representative of your file plan and your retention schedule, associate a whole host of different types of outcomes that are associated with your content lifecycle, the ability to intelligently deploy those to the appropriate places inside of your environment, automate as much as we can, because the scale of the problem is just so big that you can't do all of these things manually, and you don't want to burden your users and your records managers. And then, of course, the ability to report and provide trails of evidence and so forth, that is part and parcel with the role of a records manager. And just want to be conscious of the time, but we take care of the full life cycle from the time that the content is ingested into Office 365, gets it classified immediately, and can be shared and used like any other piece of content until it's time for its ultimate disposition. And all the while, the records manager and related staff are going to be aware of what's going on with that content and any actions that have been taken upon it and so forth. So if you'd like to learn more about how we can help you with those things, definitely encourage you to reach out to your AvePoint representative. This is just an article that you may be interested in if you're interested in records management in general in Office 365, where Gartner specifically calls out that, for organizations that are highly regulated, they might need help from somebody like AvePoint, and they talk about our solution specifically, which we are very proud of being mentioned in this article. And so with that, let me go back to a couple of questions. So licensing, what folks are saying is like, hey, the writing on the wall is that this is going to be a premium license. What's going to be available also, and kind of related to that, also that it's only in English right now. And so if it's anything you could share there.
Yeah, there's a little bit I can share there. Yeah, things like AI Builder and the forms processor are based on the CDS. So if you're familiar with that, Power Automate. So you can see where there is some licensing question up. It's using some high-end Lewis as well. I have an understanding what the licensing is. In fact, we're taking part in a series of calls just to finalize what the sort of licensing is going to be for the sort of initial release. I can't tell you what it is. I just think you'll be pleasantly surprised by what it is, I think is what I can say.
Okay, so not public just yet.
Not public just yet.
And anything that you can share about multi-language or languages other than English?
Yeah, I've admittedly been testing it mainly in English, but being a global, we have seen it doing processing languages other than English. And I know that language support is one of the areas that they're working on. I mean, with the contents in SharePoint, and SharePoint supports multi-language, lingual, so does Yammer and so on. It's a natural extension for a product to support that.
Okay. Yeah. And then we'll jump back to a previous topic. There's a question that the attendee asks, does Project Cortex use existing taxonomies in the initial mining exercise?
No, it uses its own. It curates, so creates, not curates, creates its own taxonomy.
Got it.
Right? So it develops its own.
It doesn't refer to your existing ones as part of its process.
No, your curation process will then start matching those terms up between the ones that you have and the ones that it's come up with, and you work out which one is the dominant term or topic.
And then I know that the content services team have been working on lots of different, publishing different case studies and so forth. Are you aware of any examples of Project Cortex adding value to a publishing company specifically?
Yeah, so so a lot of the technology in if you've seen Project IDA, which is an Azure Labs project, it's well worth checking Project IDA out because it gives you a feel for what a publishing company can and can't do using Cortex technology effectively. This project was developed independently of Cortex, but it uses a lot of the underpinning pieces of Cortex. So this is one I'm using as an example. And IDA has taken many editions of the Atlantic magazine, I believe it is, and processed them all. And it's developed, the topics and terms from those magazines, from the hard copies, and then you can start linking out to the relevant articles. You can see the reach, the number of people, and so on. So Project IDA is a really good example of how Cortex could be used in the publishing world. It's just Cortex. I just want to underline it. It's not presented in the way that IDA is currently presented. So there is a subtle difference, but it's using very similar technology under the hood.
And if they want to bing that, how do you spell IDA?
IDA.
IDA. All right.
Yeah.
Great. Well, guys, we're just at the top of the hour here. I really want to thank you, Simon, for coming and sharing your unique experiences and with Project Cortex and sharing your time. And I also want to thank all of our attendees for spending the last hour with us talking about this. Please keep the conversation going. Don't be a stranger. Reach out to your local AvePoint representative. We will be sharing this slide deck, I believe, with the attendees. And I will also, so you'll get to, what I'll try to do is add another slide that includes links to some of the things that came up as part of the conversation, like Project IDA and things like that. But with that, I'm going to close out exactly at 8. We did it. And Thanks, and hopefully we'll do another one soon.
Yes, thank you very
Thanks,
much.
everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.